Hello and welcome everyone to the Alex webinar, Using FAST for Faster Workflows and Discovery. This webinar is sponsored by the Faceted Subject Access Interest Group. My name is Susan Nguyen and I'm the Cataloging and Metadata Librarian at Georgia State University, and I'll be your host for today. We have two wonderful speakers this afternoon. The first presenter is Joelen Pastva. Joelen is the metadata librarian at the Galter Health Sciences Library at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. And previously she worked as the metadata catalog librarian at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The second speaker will be Allison J. Odell. Allison is the metadata librarian at the University of Florida, George A. Smathers Libraries. I have a few housekeeping details to go over before we begin. First, all attendees are muted. We do welcome you to ask questions. To do that, you'll need to type them into the question box on your screen. We'll hold the questions till the end of both presentations, and then I will read the questions to Allison and Joelen at that time. We don't have interactive chat capabilities, but we do invite you to use Twitter to comment on the presentation if you wish. And if you do that, please use the hashtag that you see on the screen, AlexCE. Keep in mind, though, that the host and the speakers will not be monitoring the Twitter feed during the presentation. So if you do want to ask them questions, make sure you use the question box in the GoToWebinar software. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and the presentation slides within 2 days. So before our speakers begin, I want to go over some of the basics of FAST. I assume that probably many of you are already familiar with FAST, but just in case it's new to any of you, I want to provide a very basic introduction. So FAST, or Faceted Application of Subject Terminology, is essentially a deconstructed version of the heading strings that we all know, and maybe we love them. I don't know. This is really a gross oversimplification. There's a lot more going on than simply breaking LCSH into its component parts, but this is a good way to start thinking about it if it's new to you. FAST has 8 facets. They are listed here: topical, geographic, so on and so forth. It's kind of a point of confusion sometimes with FAST. You can have a main heading plus a subdivision in FAST, but they must be from the same facet. For example, you can pair a topical FAST heading with a topical FAST subdivision, but you can't combine a topical heading with a geographic subdivision like we can do with LCSH. I often see listserv discussions and hear conversations that are asking, well, why FAST? Isn't it just a duplication of LCSH? Well, it's really not. With the rise of web resources and digital collections, OCLC research saw a need for a control vocabulary that is simple to learn and apply. By breaking down LCSH and LC name heading strings into their different facets, we can maintain compatibility with these established vocabularies. We can also convert existing headings if we choose to. However, with fewer rules for constructing those strings, there's a much lower barrier for training staff, and FAST headings are also much quicker and easier to apply. FAST also has some benefits for library users, as it's more suited for next-generation catalogs, discovery layers, and other faceted navigation systems, as well as linked data applications. This has been a very rudimentary introduction to FAST. On this slide, I have provided a few resources if you are interested in exploring more. Of course, you'll also learn a lot more from Joelen and Allison today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joelen. There may be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joelen Pastva, and I'm the metadata librarian at Northwestern University's Galter Health Sciences Library, which is part of the Feinberg School of Medicine. I'd like to start by thanking everyone at Alex for making this webinar possible, Susan for hosting us today, and my fellow presenter Allison for agreeing to share her own experiences working with FAST to give you an idea of the broad range of its possible applications. My presentation will discuss my work on a project in order to share ideas about how to simplify cataloging for non-catalogers using the FAST vocabulary. So first we'll get started with some background information. So this is me. I'm super excited about fall, but maybe a little apprehensive about winter being right around the corner. And just for some context, the project I'll be discussing was something that I worked on at my previous position as metadata librarian at the University of Illinois at Chicago, or UIC. So although the work lives on and continues, my role ended in May of this year before I joined Northwestern. So let's first talk about what the non-MARC metadata environment was like at UIC back in 2015. Like lots of libraries, UIC uses two different systems to manage digital and special collections metadata. Content DM for digital images, documents, and videos, and Archivist Toolkit for finding aids. These systems are the purview of the special collections and digital programs departments, where none of the librarians really consider themselves experts in traditional library cataloging. At the beginning of the project, there were 30 collections in Content DM, which were encoded in Dublin Core using LCSH. It's also important to point out that UIC's instance of Content DM is provided through and managed by the Consortium of Academic and Research Libraries in Illinois, or CARLI, so there are some restrictions that come with that arrangement. Finding aids in Archivist Toolkit are encoded in EAD, and in early 2015 there were 624 collection-level records that were presented to the public for discovery via HTML on the library's website. Since we're specifically talking about subject headings, here's a quick look at the usage of subject headings before we started our project. As you can see, Content DM had fewer subdivided subjects than Archivist Toolkit, and this is partly because of the greater reliance, I think, when cataloging was done in Archivist Toolkit on the library's catalog and LCSH for guidance. There were a lot more unique terms in Content DM, and many of which were only used once, and this is in part because some terms were entered in a variety of different forms that would normally share the same controlled heading. So let's get to the main reasons we first began investigating FAST, non-expert catalogers. There were a few factors in play regarding the creation of metadata for Content DM and Archivist Toolkit at UIC. As I mentioned before, the librarians in the departments responsible for the metadata are not catalogers, and in fact much of the metadata creation is actually done by graduate assistants and student employees. The librarians supervising the work generally felt like they were ill-equipped to train others in the use of LCSH, and they were also constantly pressed for time. Even if they did have the time to invest, they often had to deal with a high turnover rate among their employees, and they didn't really have any real or approachable documentation to help them with their training for subject analysis. So there were lots of reasons to be discouraged, but maybe the biggest one, which leads us to problem number 2, was that there was inconsistent metadata that resulted from minimally trained catalogers. And so this is just to give you an idea of the different kinds of problems that we were encountering with our metadata, and I'm sure that anybody who's done any kind of metadata cleanup is probably familiar with these, but I want to point out the two on the bottom in bold because they're specifically related to a sort of lack of understanding of how to format LCSH terms, and they happened a lot. And so you've got a difference in the use of punctuation to indicate subdivisions, and then a difference in the way that subdivisions are ordered. And maybe it's important at this point to quickly ask here, and I know that I'm probably speaking to the choir, but preaching to the choir, but why are we so concerned about subject headings? They only seem to make up a small part of the overall record, especially if you're looking at a finding aid. But I think it's important to note that unlike a lot of other description that goes into cataloging, subject headings do require interacting with external resources, and they impose restrictions on the cataloger. So that means that they often require more judgment than other parts of a record. This can really slow things down, and then the catalogers can get frustrated if they don't feel comfortable with what they're doing. And so, of course, there are other reasons that we need to be concerned about inconsistent metadata. First, we are worried about usability. If our metadata is inconsistent, that makes our public-facing interfaces less effective for our users, especially those users that are relying on facets and keyword searching, which is probably the majority of our users. And that generally would then increase the chance of confusion. Inconsistent metadata also impacts interoperability, which is increasingly important now that not all of our metadata is local, right? This was especially relevant for UIC at the time because we were gearing up to share our digital materials with the Explore Chicago Collections metadata portal. In fact, they were actually one of the institutions that was instrumental in spearheading that project. And they were also contributing a collection to the Digital Library of the Caribbean. We're also looking ahead to the near future as we plan to start contributing to DPLA. So our responsibility is extended beyond our local systems to the larger library and cultural heritage community. So this is why we began investigating FAST as our solution. I want to note that we did discuss some other possibilities that were more along the lines of, say, maintaining the status quo using LCSH and trying to beef up our approach to training. We tried to be, especially skeptical about the possibilities of, another vocabulary coming along and magically solving all of our problems. But here's why we decided to give FAST a chance. Our librarians liked that there would be no more subdividing, at least of the sort that happens in LCSH. So as Susan mentioned, subdivisions do exist in FAST, but they are more limited in the way that they are used. We looked at some of the different ways that people were searching for things in our catalog and website, and they generally preferred simple keyword strings. So we like that our subject headings would better align with this behavior by being faceted. Fewer subdivisions would also make training easier because it simplifies the process of assigning subjects. Also because FAST is derived from LCSH, much of the vocabulary already in use would be retained, meaning this wouldn't be a dramatic change from our past practices. Finally, our non-cataloging librarians liked the look of the FAST user interface. They found it really simple and easy to jump into. So there are a few different options for using FAST for the different tools, depending on the use case. So there's Search FAST, which is kind of for your all-around use. It gives you a view of the actual records for terms, and it's for, I would say, early users of FAST. There's Assign FAST, which is more of a quick retrieval kind of tool that will use auto-suggest to show you the terms but not actually take you to the records. And then there's the FAST Converter. If you're working with MARC records and LCSH terms, it'll help you figure out how to convert those to FAST. And this is a quick look at the difference in the LCSH interface and the Search FAST interface. So if you imagine that you're a beginner user and you have to go look up a term, so you go to id.lsc.gov and you want to find the authorized term for Chicago. So on the left-hand side, you type in Chicago, you hit search, and you can see that in the first 10 search results, none of them are actually what you would want to be using. However, if you look on the right to the Search FAST interface, all you have to do is type in the terms. You don't even have to hit search, and the term that you would be using in FAST is already presented in bold, ready to go. Easy, right? So we made a plan. The creation of new digital collections was largely on hold at the time at UIC, so it was a great time to do some retrospective work. We were going to replace LCSH terms with FAST, but we decided not to use the time period facet and to use the genre facets only sparingly because the data was going to be captured elsewhere in the records. Any subdivided terms would be split, and we were going to create new documentation to accompany the use of FAST. Moving forward, we plan to use FAST for any new metadata that was created. Generally, we expected this work was going to be gradual, especially in terms of when those changes would be reflected to the public. This was okay because, then it was a good time to kind of try something new. And I will say that it turned out to definitely be the case that changes were gradual because in many cases, some of the public interfaces have yet to be updated with the current metadata. So the first part of our implementation was to convert terms from LCSH to FAST. This was a different process for each platform. So with Content DM, we had to work in the web interface because of certain issues that accompanied our work on the Chicago Collections Portal project. So we were somewhat limited in what we could do. We worked on a collection-by-collection basis and performed batch updates wherever we possibly could. But there were fewer subdivisions than what we saw in Archivist Toolkit, so many of the terms ended up staying the same. Now this conversion process is still underway even as of May of 2016. For Archivist Toolkit, because the vocabulary is shared across all the collections, it was possible to go in and make one change to a term and have it be reflected across all the collections, so that was really great. We manually split the subdivided terms, and then we modified Archivist Toolkit to give us a drop-down in our term source list so we could have FAST included there. And we also updated our EAD style sheet so that it would display the FAST facets in the public interface. So here's a quick look at our public interfaces after the change to FAST. So on the left is Content DM. It's not dramatically different from the way it was before. The only noticeable area I would say is in the geographic location where you can see, Illinois, Waukegan, where it's entered in that indirect order. On the right is Archivist Toolkit, and so previously these terms would have been, many of them would have been combined as one subdivided subject in LCSH, so Chicago, Illinois, politics and government, that sort of thing. And so here you can see that they're more discretely faceted and split up. The second part of our implementation was to train our librarians and cataloging staff on using FAST. I started by creating documentation for our staff wiki, giving an overview of FAST, links to the various FAST tools, along with some basic instructions on using those tools, and a list of different tips and best practices for assigning subjects. I then conducted an in-person training session. So this was intended for everyone involved in creating non-MARC metadata at our library. Now to me this was a big test to see whether FAST would end up being as user-friendly as we'd hoped. What we found out was that it took us much less time to get through the discussion about the FAST vocabulary and how to use the tools to find terms online. And instead we were able to focus more on the methodology behind assigning subject headings. So we talked about user needs, including what steps users took in their request to find a resource, which is related to the Ferber user tasks. We also went over some techniques for performing subject analysis that made the process much more painless and approachable. This was a big victory to me when you consider the fact, as I mentioned before, that assigning subject headings is just one step in the process of cataloging a resource. So here's a quick peek at some of the training documentation that I created. On the right is sort of your general introduction to FAST, describing the different facets and linking to the tools and giving some tips on how to go about assigning terms. And then on the left is more of the specific how to go about assigning subject terms, starting with user tasks and then going over some different techniques and best practices. So I'd like to take a few minutes to wrap up and discuss some of the outcomes of our implementation of FAST at UIC. I will say that the conversion is still not complete, and I do think it would be interesting to revisit the project in maybe another year or so after more metadata has been created and they've gone through some rounds of training. Nevertheless, here's what I can say based on the year or so that I was involved with the project. Overall, we had good first impressions. As I demonstrated with a view of the different user interfaces, it's generally faster using FAST. Because it's a more straightforward vocabulary, our librarians found it more approachable and they felt that they could more comfortably instruct our staff. And although we didn't create a lot of new collections after adopting FAST, the metadata looked cleaner compared to when we started. But I will say that nothing is perfect. The FAST interface had its own quirks to get used to. For example, when you're doing a search, it defaults by ranking search results to those that are most heavily used, which can be a little irritating if you're looking to, say, browse for a term that you're not sure about, and you would rather have an alphabetical list of terms. But you can change that when you're actually in the interface. And also, even though I promised my catalogers there would be no more subdividing, the subdivisions do still remain in some cases in FAST, but the good thing is that they're established headings, so what you see is what you get. Finally, there are still problems with our systems themselves that a new vocabulary would never solve. We are slowed in our progress by restrictions on batch editing, and many of our finding aids still haven't had their public interfaces updated to reflect the new FAST terms that exist on the back end. UIC's finding aids in HTML don't have hyperlinking at all for subjects, and the Content DM interface is a little bit wonky in the way that it splits up multi-word subject strings into separate links, and so I can actually, if we go back to look at the interfaces here, you can see on the left for Content DM in the topical subjects list, 4th of July celebrations should just be one link to all uses of that subject term, but instead it's 3 separate hyperlinks to 4th July and celebrations. Not terribly helpful. And then, of course, in Archivist Toolkit, we don't have any hyperlinks, so that kind of limits some of the usability that we would hope to get out of making this change. So overall, I'd like to conclude by stating that despite these drawbacks, FAST worked for us at UIC. The tools themselves were easy to use, and so then we had more time to focus on techniques for doing subject analysis, which hadn't really been done before. Our catalogers were then more comfortable in their own judgments and general understanding of what they were being asked to do, and they could move on to other aspects of cataloging more quickly. Finally, FAST better reflects the searching behavior of our users, which should hopefully aid in improving resource discovery. And I'd like to conclude by stating that generally this project was a much needed acknowledgement that non-MARC metadata is different from MARC metadata. So the departments that manage non-MARC metadata are different, right? The item level cataloging is different, the catalogers are different, so why not try a different approach that accounts for these differences? We came to our solution thanks to cross-departmental collaboration, which is increasingly helpful and necessary for metadata projects. Finally, we viewed our project as an attempt to better align our practices to fit user behaviors and needs. Cleaner metadata means a better discovery experience, and simpler subjects present language that our users are more accustomed to seeing in their own keyword searches. If we do a better job of getting our users to our resources, we're doing a better job of fulfilling the library's mission. So here's just a list of credits for the images that I've used. And this is the end of my slide, so thank you very much. This is the end of my portion of the presentation. We'll be saving questions for the end, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Allison.
All right. Well, thank you, Joelen, and thanks again to Susan and everyone at Alex for making this really awesome webinar happen. I am Allison J. Odell. I'm the metadata librarian at the George A. Smathers Libraries at the University of Florida. So whereas Joelen talked about using FAST in back-end workflows and all of the really great advantages for in-house staff and streamlining activities there, I'm going to talk about using FAST on the front end to aid in user discovery of our library's resources. And Susan mentioned at the beginning that FAST is designed for today's discovery scenarios. So I just want to take a look at that in practice. And in particular, I'm going to talk about a solution that I developed, or rather customized, to help users when they're at the beginning of their research, when they don't even really know what to search for. Sorry about that. So what I'm going to talk about is a guided search solution. Now, guided search is useful in the exploratory research phase. A guided search gives users a set of options to choose from to help get them started, to help them understand their topic and the ways that it might be categorized and further explored. We're familiar with guided search on sites like Pinterest, where common search terms are presented along the top-hand bar. We're also familiar with it through Google image search, which basically does the same thing. And our library catalogs do something similar. We offer facets for narrowing a search, allowing our users to navigate by subjects, genres, and more. But the faceted navigation interfaces common to library catalogs supply limits on an existing search, so they require that a search has begun. So how do we help users who are really at the beginning of their work and they don't even know what they're looking for yet? And for those users, that search box can look dauntingly empty. They may have questions such as, well, where do I even begin? What does the library even have? What keywords can I use to find the stuff that's going to help me? So once upon a time, these users could just flip through the card catalog to get a sense of what the library has and where to begin their research. Why did this work? because it gave users access to our indexes for browsing and for ideas. Now we have online catalogs, and we've learned that today's users really like a single search box, a single empty search box, just like Google. But Google has a solution to tackle that dauntingly emptiness of the single search box. It's called autocomplete technology. We're familiar with this, those often hilarious but usually spot-on suggestions made when you begin typing into the search box. Google's autocomplete technology is based on common phrases in their data set. And their data set is basically all the stuff that's online. So my question was, what can libraries use to autocomplete with if we want to provide that same discovery experience? What is our data set? Well, our data set is basically our catalog metadata. So what represents common phrases in our data set? Our controlled vocabularies. So my idea was to autocomplete with suggestions from our controlled vocabularies. And for proof of concept, I customized the Assign Fast tool, which is already built to autocomplete with suggested fast headings as one starts typing in the search box. Joelen gave a little bit of a look at this. It's available on the FAST website if you guys want to check it out. Assign Fast was designed for back-end cataloging tasks, but turns out it works just as well when you customize it for front-end discovery. So to summarize the idea, I integrated the Assign Fast tool with the library catalog search box so that when a user begins typing, the box suggests controlled vocabulary headings that they can use as search terms. And you can check out the demo online. I'll just run through the basics. Start typing, offer some suggestions for search terms, and then redirects to the search results in the library catalog. So the Assign Fast tool is written in JavaScript, which is basically the programming language for HTML and web documents. It can be easily integrated with your existing search box or library website. And I'll just go through the details of what you would need to know to mimic my demo. First, you'd want to check out the code for the search form. Look for that form tag. You'll note that there are 3 format options in the Assign Fast tool as it's written. The latter 2, the mark breaker format and the connection format, those make sense for catalogers. They make sense when you're doing cataloging activity. But when customizing this for end users, for discovery interfaces, really only need the first option for the common format, which is basically just, that heading in text. So to mimic what I did, you'll need to copy the code for the form onto your site where your search box goes, essentially. And you'll note down at the bottom that I've added one thing, which is that button tag. And here I've got an instruction to run a search fast function when someone clicks the search button. And that function is what tells the computer, hey, go search the library catalog with the term that the user selected. So basically what I'm doing here is just building a search URL that works with my catalog and then reassigning the window location to the catalog. And that same concept can be applied for any search interface, any library catalog that you guys have. So getting back to the form is using these scripts, and you'd need to include them in the head of your HTML document on your library's website. And paying particular attention to the one that I've highlighted, assign fast gadget.javascript, This is the one that you need to edit to customize the look and feel of the search experience. This is the one that controls the connection between the auto-suggest functionality and the HTML display. So for my demo, I changed the labels on the subject types to make them a little bit more user-friendly. So that's stuff like, for catalogers, we say corporate name, I made it say organization. And instead of personal name, I made it say person, just a little more user-friendly. I also hid the display of the URI, figuring that end users probably don't care what it is. And to further customize the look and feel, you'll want to pay attention to a couple of different tags and IDs and classes in your own CSS file. So if you want to reference my slides later, you don't have to go digging for what's going to prove to be most important. These are the ones you'd want to pay attention to and add a little style to. And that is basically it. It is as simple as that. To set up a custom search box that auto-completes with fast terminology and allows users to have a guided search experience and to search the catalog using controlled vocabulary terms. And all of that is possible because the great folks at OCLC Research already wrote the Assign Fast tool, which is easily customized. And now we're going to take joint questions, and I will turn it back over to Susan.
All right. Thank you so much, Allison and Joelen, for those presentations. So I hope that you all have some great questions or comments. Please type those into the question box on your screen, and I will read them out to both of the presenters. Right now, I just have one question that's already come in, and this is for Joelen. Is UIC updating from Archivist Toolkit to Archive Space?
I can say that they were considering it. I know for a while it was like a definite plan for them to move over. I mean, I think it's certainly the case that they need to move from Archivist Toolkit because it's seen as something that's not supported anymore, and they need to migrate over to something. I think they're just trying to sort of see what else is out there at the moment to get a feel for if there are any other products that might be better suited for their needs. But I know Archive Space was a definite maybe on the list, probably one of the top contenders.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's see. Oh, we have lots of questions coming in very fast. Okay. Okay. How does one add new vocabulary to FAST? What if a term that you need is not in LCSH and therefore not in FAST?
I'm actually not sure of what the procedure is for adding new terms to FAST. I know that there's a pretty active user community involved in developing FAST and suggesting improvements through OCLC, through their research group, but I'm actually not sure how they go about taking, I mean, they have like a link on their website that allows you to send them your ideas. So I think they're pretty receptive to most of the input that they get, and they have a pretty active listserv when it comes up. So beyond that, I'm actually not sure how to go about contributing a new term to FAST.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One of the universities that has done a lot of work with FAST is Cornell, and I know that they have worked a lot with OCLC research on situations where a term isn't there. Okay.
So,
sorry, Allison, go ahead.
A lot of these questions might be directed at the new FAST listserv. So, Joe.
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that Joelen and I are talking about using FAST at our institutions, but as far as management of the vocabulary and future directions and that sort of thing, those questions are better posed to the folks at OCLC Research and or the entire FAST community, so the listserv is a great way to go.
I totally agree, and the new list is called FACETVOC, FACETVOCL. It's hosted by OCLC Research, and I hope that I remember to put a link to that in your slides. If I did not, I will try to rectify that before it gets sent out. So that's a great question. Let's go to the next one. Do we need to make local authority records for all of these new FAST headings so that they link in our catalogs? That's a great question too. And I can try to comment on that. I'm not sure if that question has really been figured out yet. As many of you know, OCLC has added FAST headings in WorldCat on a programmatic basis. And so you're downloading lots of MARC records that have both LCSH and FAST in them. There are FAST authority records available. I have not really heard from many people who are actually loading those in. My question would be, you know, I would like to work with a vendor maybe to provide those, like that we get records from a vendor for LCSH and LC name headings and things like that. And so I'm kind of curious whether vendors are providing that. So that's another excellent question that I don't think I can fully answer, but it's something that I think needs a lot of attention.
Yeah, I will say at Northwestern for our digital repository, actually, we're using FAST as one of our controlled vocabularies, and so we do actually load the FAST authority file so that that link is established, but we're not using it. I mean, we have, you know, some of the FAST terms, of course, as they come in our MARC records, but beyond that, it's not really been actively investigated for our traditional library catalog.
Thanks. Okay. All right, here's a question about converting LCSH. How did you convert LCSH to FAST in Content DM, and what tools did you use?
So this one is maybe going to be a little bit of a letdown because it was a pretty manual process most of the time because of the fact that we had to be working in the web interface of Content DM. We weren't able to do any kind of exporting of large amounts of data and, you know, working with them in any tools like OpenRefine. We basically had to work in the interface, which was a local restriction that probably doesn't apply to most institutions. So we ended up just using, you know, the FAST tools, of course, to find the terms, but then splitting up was basically just doing a lot of analysis on what we had and trying to, you know, identify what needed to be split, and then running batch changes in Content DM to change those terms, and, you know, finding geographic terms, because those were the ones that were most obviously going to need to be changed, and changing those in batch as well. And anything else that would, you know, those terms that hadn't been subdivided, a lot of them were kind of just let go because it was sort of assumed that for the most part they would stay the same, but it was actually a very manual process, which is probably why in part it's still an ongoing process.
Okay. I'd like to add to that if you're working with LCSH in MARC records, then there is an LCSH to FAST converter on the OCLC Research FAST webpage, and I have tested it with some MARC files, and it's actually quite slick. I like it I like it a lot. I will mention also that my institution has a strong interest in converting our existing LCSH in Content DM to FAST as well, but our database is so large we haven't been able to figure out how to do it with the limitations of Content DM. And I think one of our issues is the heading strings live in Content DM with just dashes instead of, you know, MARC subdivisions that tell us what kind of subdivision they are. So it would be hard to do that, I think, programmatically outside of MARC, because you don't know exactly what type of subdivision you might be trying to work with. But the MARC converter tool is really, really nice. So I totally recommend playing with that if anybody has a chance. Anything else on that topic? Okay, I'll go on to the next question. Is FAST being used in MARC cataloging? We've seen it in some records that we download from OCLC.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I hate to keep inserting myself into this, but yes, that is correct. OCLC has been adding FAST to WorldCat records programmatically, and so people are definitely seeing them and having lots of questions about it. Again, I'll mention Cornell. That's one school that I'm familiar with that has been using FAST in their minimal level cataloging at least, and maybe beyond that. Yes, most schools are not really assigning FAST headings, themselves, but they might be keeping or making use of the headings that are in WorldCat records. But Cornell is the only school that I know that's actively using FAST in their MARC cataloging at this point. There might be others that I'm just not aware of, though.
Yeah, I'm aware of one project at the Newberry Library where they were, I believe it was a grant-funded project, and so there were some time constraints, and they were trying to sort of get as much done as quickly as they could, and so the idea was that they would use FAST for MARC cataloging, and they would train the sort of non-expert cataloger class of folks to learn how to use FAST so that they could get subject analysis done more quickly in the creation of their MARC records. So I think that that was a fairly successful undertaking as well at the Newberry.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so now I have two questions that are essentially the same question, so I'll combine these into one, and this is for Joelen. We have two requests for you to share your UIC documentation, your training documentation on the use of FAST.
Certainly.
So if you're okay, we can make arrangements for the Alexa office to include that in the email, I believe. I hope.
Yeah, whatever is the most straightforward way to go about sharing that, I'm happy to.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, and here's a follow-up to an earlier question about how to get new terms into FAST, and the question is, wouldn't a new FAST term require a new LCSH term first? Otherwise, they wouldn't stay compatible. That would agree with my understanding of how things are currently working, but it is possible to suggest new terminology, and I'm not sure if that makes it into the stream of LCSH proposals. That's a really great question that I would like to know a little bit more about as well.
It'd be a good thing to ask on the listserv.
Yeah.
I do just sort of know. I don't know why I know, but I know that FAST is more extensive than LCSH, particularly for events and things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That and when you look at some of the facets, like chronological, there's less obvious, parallels sometimes with LCSH. There's more flexibility and more options.
And it's my understanding that I don't think that the goal is necessarily to have FAST terms mirror LCSH terms after the vocabulary. I mean, I think they just use LCSH to derive the vocabulary for FAST, but I think that, at least in terms of the way that the terms are defined or their scope, they are, I think, more willing to sort of deviate from what's defined in LCSH, if that makes sense. So the idea of there possibly being a term in FAST that doesn't exist in LCSH is, I think that's okay.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, here's another question. Do you have any idea if other archives are adopting the use of FAST?
So this is Allison, if I can just jump in and say that we are, at least. And for the reasons that Joelen articulated, data interoperability and ease of application.
Yes, and I remember when I first started hearing about FAST several years ago, I believe it was University of North Dakota that did a lot of presentations about using FAST with their digital collections. So I think they, if they're not still using it, they did at one time, and maybe they still are. So yeah, I've been hearing a little bit about that as well myself.
And I'll say that since I pretty much spoke on the same topic at ALA Midwinter, that's sort of how we all came together here. I did get some questions from some other people who are considering implementing FAST, and I think it's, for the same reasons that we've been talking about. And so I think that if people aren't necessarily doing it now, a lot of people are considering moving in that direction. And I heard, and I haven't actually been able to confirm this, so let's just say this is colloquially true, but I've heard that the new version of Content DM, I think it's 7, is supposed to possibly have some sort of integration with FAST, which would make sense because they're both OCLC products, and if that is the case, I think then that would make it a lot easier for people to implement FAST, but I haven't been able, I've just heard this from some announcements, some sort of early announcements about what's going on with the development of that platform. So maybe new versions of Content DM will be a little more friendly for people who are interested in using FAST.
That would be excellent. Yes, I think I agree. That would make a lot of sense. Okay, and at the moment I just have one more question in my question box, and this is for Allison. What kind of user testing did you do with the Assign Fast tool?
So I'll start off by clarifying two things. First, I didn't write the Assign Fast tool. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is something that's available on the OCLC Research Fast homepage. It's open source, it's free, you can take the code, you can make it your own, it's awesome. So my project was really just designed as proof of concept for that auto-suggest experience. And using the Assign Fast tool to do that in a really quick and dirty way. It being so simple didn't really warrant extensive user testing. The usability would really be inherent in the Assign Fast tool, and then my implementation of it is just to help people search the catalog. So this is to say that I did not schedule a really extensive IRB-approved user study. What I did was show it to people and ask them what they thought. And everyone was like, cool, does the thing. It helps, you know. And at least in our different metadata platforms, our library catalog, archives, and digital collections, we're using FAST and/or LCSH headings. So auto-completing with fast terms is just a really great set of keywords for searching our metadata, and it makes a lot of sense for us. So the user feedback is informal and all really positive. If there's anything else that anyone is really curious about,
Hi, I'm sorry, I got kicked out and got back in. Can you hear me?
Hi, this is Joelen. I'm back.
Okay, it looks like other people are back too.
So I don't know if it would be helpful to try to keep going through. It looks like Susan is still trying to get back on, but we can try to, we still got about 10 minutes left, so we could try to get through some more questions.
I
This is
think that was
Susan.
the last question.
This is Susan. I'm back. I'm
Okay.
so sorry.
So do we want to try to get back to it looks like maybe there are a couple of questions that have come up since we got booted off.
Okay. Yes, I do see a couple of additional ones. I will be glad to continue. Does the fact that schools aren't picking up fast mean that interoperability, especially for repositories, is still a pipe dream? Good question.
I guess interoperability is the big challenge for everybody, right? um, I mean, I think it's still a challenge, definitely. I wouldn't, maybe I'll just be optimistic and say I don't think it's a pipe dream. The great thing about FAST, at least in terms of MARC metadata, is that a lot of FAST terms have just been supplied or created programmatically, so they, people haven't had to do anything, and they exist in catalog records. And I think that if it becomes easier for people to integrate FAST with other tools that they're using, then I think it's more likely that they'll use them. And I know that they've adopted FAST in I think it's in the Vivo ontology. So I think that other communities are definitely interested in FAST, and maybe it has been slow to get picked up, but I don't think that maybe the verdict is still out on it, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also see that the more, now that people are seeing, especially catalogers are seeing them a lot more in the MARC records, and we're gaining more experience with the discovery layers, faceted navigation systems, and seeing some of the limitations of LCSH in those interfaces. I think that will help FAST to gain some more traction. Okay, so the last question that I have now is the Assign Fast tool used for catalogs with LCSH? And I'm not, is Allison Odell back in did Allison
Yes.
get back in? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that
Sorry
might
about
be a
that.
question for you, so
So, yeah.
and do you need clarification on the question?
The question is,
Is the
would
Assign Fast tool used for catalogs with LCSH?
so I will answer the way that I'm interpreting this question, and then somebody can follow up if they actually meant something else. So I was talking a little bit about this when we got cut off, but basically the way that I implemented that demo, it's just trying to give the user some keywords to search on. So because so much of FAST is derived from LCSH, if you've got only LCSH in your catalog and you did what I did, it would still provide really great recall, because you'd basically just be searching for pieces of LCSH headings. Does that make sense? Is that what was meant by that question?
I think so. Unfortunately, I think the person who asked it might have, I think we all got kicked out, but I think that person has not been able to get back in. So, but yeah, I think so. And I have one more question. Is there a particular discipline that is using FAST more than others?
I haven't noticed as such. I think it's kind of, because it's derived from LCSH, it's sort of I think appealing to a broad community of users. But in terms of implementing FAST, I don't know beyond, for instance, the Vivo community, which is maybe more based in the sciences, the sort of STEM-focused group.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they have incorporated it into their ontology. Beyond that, I'm not really sure whether there's been any one particular discipline that's gone for it more than others.
Yeah, I'm not either. Okay. Well, unless Joelen or Allison has any last comments, that's all the questions that I have. And I would like to go ahead and wrap up. First of all, thank you, Joelen and Allison, for your really interesting presentations. Thank you to all the attendees for asking wonderful questions. We are really, really glad that y'all could be with us today. Soon you will receive a short online evaluation form, and we really encourage you to take a few minutes to respond to that. Your comments are very valuable to the ELECT's Continuing Education Committee, and they use those to help plan future events. ELECTS offers certificates of attendance and digital badges for participants, and you'll receive information on those in the emails that you get after the webinar. So I have some special thanks. Thank you to the Faceted Subject Access Interest Group for sponsoring the webinar. To Iping Chen Gaffey and Julia Hess with ELECTS Tech Support, Allison Armstrong from the Webinar Production Subcommittee, and Megan Doherty and Julie Reese from the ELECTS office. The support that these individuals provide as part of the Continuing Ed Committee make it possible for us to present these webinars, and usually we don't get kicked out in the middle of them. But thanks to everyone, especially CE and the ELECTS office, for the wonderful support. And as you can see, I hope you can see this final slide that lists a sampling of some of the upcoming offerings from the ELECTS Continuing Education Committee. We have lots of webinars going on all the time, as well as our very popular web courses, and I invite you to take a look at the ELECTS website for more details on all of those. And we hope that you'll be able to participate in other ELECTS events in the future. Once again, thank you so much for being with us today.